Hi, everybody. Lawyer Autumn Whit-Boyd here. And today we are talking all about interior designers and decorators, what you need to know legally. So do you know, if you're a decorator or designer, what would happen if your business had a dispute with a client? This happens more often than I want to talk about. Or what would happen if, let's say, you helped a client install some beautiful draperies, maybe some very heavy, hardware to hang those. What if those came crashing down and maybe damaged something in the homeowner's home, or God forbid, a child or someone was nearby and they crashed on their head and injured them? These are real issues that come up for our interior design and decorator clients. These are not hypotheticals. The last question I have for you is, what would happen if you found that someone had copied one of your designs? How do you protect your designs and deal with copycats? So you are in luck. We are going to cover all of those topics today and more. I'm going to dive right in and start with my standard disclaimer, which is that I am an attorney. I'm licensed to practice in Tennessee. Our firm works with clients all over the United States on these kinds of issues. And if you are watching or listening to this on a podcast, please just take this as information. This is not meant to be legal advice. This is just meant to get your wheels turning, help you maybe what we call issue spotting as lawyers, help you know what might be coming if you are building your own interior design and decorating business. I'll also give you a quick preview. Next week on the podcast, we are going to have an interview with designer Kendall Simmons, who is based in Nashville, but she also offers online e-design services. She's got a really interesting business, and I know that you are going to really love my interview with Kendall. So definitely stay tuned for that. All right, so let's dive in with some legal basics. Now, if you have listened to the podcast before or watched any of my videos, you know that I think contracts are the number one most important legal protection for every business. And that is certainly true with respect to an interior design or decorating business. So I want to start by talking about some of the issues that might come up in your services agreement with your client. So this is the core legal document for every client-based business. So for an interior designer or decorator, your relationship with your clients is, my guess, that's how you're basically getting paid. That's your major revenue stream. So we want to make sure that that is locked down with a really solid contract. So these contracts are set up a little bit differently than a lot of my other creative service providers that we've been talking about in this series on different kinds of creative businesses. So if you listened last week, you may have heard the episode about copywriters. We've also talked about e-commerce. We've talked about graphic designers and branding agencies. Interior decorators bring up a couple different issues, so I'm excited to dive into those. So the first thing, of course, in any contract is, what are you going to be doing? What are you providing? Your client is probably hiring you to do something. That could look, there may be lots of different services that you offer. So we want to be really clear in each time that you're signing a client agreement that everybody knows what they're getting, so there's no questions later on. And I'll talk in a minute about, some different phases or different types of services that you may offer. But we want to be really clear in our services agreement of what exactly the client can expect, and so that you as the interior decorator or designer know what you are signing up for. The second thing is payment. So you're not doing this for free, or if you are, we want to be very clear about that. But you're probably doing this because you want to make some money for your business. And this is where things can get really complicated with an interior design and decorating business. We've worked on a number of these agreements for our clients, and we just did a pretty complex one recently for some of our local clients, Miles and Kirk. I'll give them a shout out, and we'll put a link to their beautiful work. They're here in the Chattanooga area. But so it brought up some of these issues about all the different ways that you might get paid. So I want you to think about what options you prefer, and let's make sure it's spelled out very clearly in the contract. So you may work on a flat fee. And I'll also give a shout out to the decorator that we used for our home, and she's also helped us put together the AWB firm office. I don't know, I'll turn my, you can see these beautiful curtains she helped me pick out. You can see she helped me hang the art and I'll start moving my computer. If you're listening to this on the podcast, you can go check out our social media. You can find a couple of pictures of our office on Instagram. The interior decorator that we've used, her name is Kim Lemon with Green Room Interiors. She's here in Chattanooga as well. So you might charge a flat fee. That's how we have sometimes worked with Kim in the past. So you just say, I'm going to decorate this room. That's how we worked with her on The Office. She basically had a price per room and we kind of worked our way through the office, but it was a flat fee. We knew exactly what to expect. We were paying her up front. Or you might work hourly. We've also done that with Kim in the past. And you may have different arrangements with different clients, which is fine. But we want it to be spelled out really clearly in the contract so there's no questions later on. You thought you were working at a flat fee. The client thought you were hourly. Maybe you weren't even tracking your time because you thought it was a flat fee. It just can be a big mess if it's not clearly spelled out. Often decorators have, I have found pretty unique to decorators and designers, but sometimes they are paid not by the project or by the hour, but they just charge a commission on the items that they procure or choose or select or order. So they may, let's say you have a dining room in your house that you need decorated. So they may just choose all the different things, the table, the chairs, maybe a china hutch or a silver chest or, other kinds of pieces for the room. And they present those to you as options. And then if you end up buying them, they charge a fee on top of that, a commission on the items procured. So that's one way that sometimes designers are paid. If that is how you are paid as a designer, there's some things I want you to think about. And that is, what happens if, let's say the client says, no, thanks, I'm not going to buy any of these. But then you find out they went behind your back and did order it. They ordered it after you selected it, but you didn't get the commission. You want to have some language in your contract about what happens in that scenario. Another thing that comes up is a lot of my designer clients have relationships with vendors that they use frequently. And so the vendors give them a designer discount, maybe a furniture company or a paint store or wallpaper provider. Do you pass that discount on to the client, or is that basically something where you kind of keep that, you charge the client full price, but you keep the difference? There are no rules around this, but you have to be upfront with your client and make sure that everyone knows what's going on, or you could get the client coming after you later saying you weren't, honest, you weren't transparent. You were maybe keeping more than they understood that you were going to keep, or charging them differently than they understood you were going to charge them. So anytime as we're going through these issues that can pop up with designers, I want you to keep in mind that your contract is really meant to protect both sides. This is just my outlook, my personal perspective. I am a really big fan of entering into these relationships that are collaborative. I mean, if you're in someone's home, you're helping them create a space that they love. That's very collaborative. And so I think that you should start that relationship with a contract that is very even-handed, that protects both of you, that has terms that are clear and easy to understand, that if you do have questions or concerns that pop up later, both of you could refer back to the contract and figure out what the heck it was that you agreed to in the beginning. So as I'm thinking through all of these things, that's really my goal. Whenever we're putting together a contract and with all of our contract templates, I should mention we do have a new interior design and decorator contract template that will be up in our contract store. If you're watching the video, it's not quite up yet, but if you're listening to the podcast, it will be live at awbfirm.com by the time the podcast goes live. So we put these even-handed, protect both sides kind of terms in all of the contracts that we are creating and that we sell in our template store. So when you're thinking through making sure that everybody understands what they're getting into, everyone understands the payment scenarios, we want to be really, really clear. Some other things that come up with an interior design or decorator contract can be expenses. So let's say you maybe have to get samples. Maybe you're ordering, swatches of fabric or wallpaper samples, paint samples, tile. There's all kinds of things that you want to get a sample so you can see it in real life before it goes into the client's home or office. Sometimes there's a charge for that. So are you kind of eating that charge as part of your fee, or are you passing that on to the client? Again, you have a choice of which one you do, but we want to be clear so that everyone knows upfront how that's going to be handled. Oftentimes, decorators and designers will help the client with actually, executing the design. So not just drawing it up on a pretty piece of paper or suggesting items, but actually, installing the draperies, having the furniture recovered, having tile installed, all the different things. When you walk into a home and you say, wow, all of that stuff has to be put together somehow by real people. So if you are helping with that, are you hiring subcontractors? Are you hiring an installer, an upholsterer, a wallpaper hanger, a painter, a plumber, a tile guy? All of those parts and pieces. It can be a lot of moving parts. So who's responsible for that? We want to make that very clear in the contract. And again, if you are basically upcharging, let's say maybe you're hiring all the subcontractors, but you're charging their fee plus, an extra fee for you to manage them, or for your job, hiring them, getting all of that set up. Again, we want to be really clear in the contract how all those payments are going to work. If you are not hiring the subcontractors, but the client is responsible for that, and the client is responsible for paying them directly, we want that in the contract. Again, we just don't want any bad surprises. We love good surprises, but in a contract, we really don't want any bad surprises when it comes time to pay or hire or, get everything finished. A lot of decorators don't just work in their own area, but maybe they develop a reputation and they travel to other places. So if you are anticipating you may have travel expenses, that's something you want to build into your contract. Again, is that included as part of your fees, or is that something that you're going to, bill to the client or be reimbursed for? This came up recently. What about storage fees? So let's say maybe you order a sofa or another large piece of furniture for a client, and it comes in, but maybe they're not ready for it yet. Maybe the tile hasn't been installed, or the carpet, or the other parts and pieces of the project. So they don't have a place to put it. Do you have a storage facility that you're willing to use, and do you pass along that fee to the clients? We want to be, again, really upfront and clear about storage fees. And then the last thing I want to mention about payments and different ways of working with clients on your fees is refunds. So typically with a service like this, where you're providing a creative service, maybe you're providing a design or a concept, some drawings to start, typically that work is not going to be refundable. It's up to you. Again, you have a lot of flexibility here. But what I have seen typically is, you expect that someone is hiring you because they've seen your work or someone recommended you. They have an idea of kind of what they're getting into. But there's a lot of, subjectivity here, personal judgment. You could walk into a room at my home and think it's beautiful, and someone else might walk in and think, oh, this is awful. I do not like this at all. So typically the client will expect that you're going to be in line with things they've seen before, or maybe you've had discussions, they've given you guidance. But think about how you would want to deal with refunds if, let's say, the client is not happy and they want to move on to someone else, or maybe they want to take parts and pieces of your design, do it themselves. How are you going to deal with refund requests? We want to be very clear about that in the contract. And then kind of a flip side of that, if they don't like something you ordered, how does that work? Do you accept returns? Will you facilitate returns? Is there a charge for that? Oftentimes, especially the higher end interior decorators and designers that we've worked with, you're ordering custom pieces. So these may not even be returnable. If you're having a particular fabric put on an item, or if you're, ordering a limited run of wallpaper that they don't want it back after you get it, it may not be returnable. So again, you want to be really clear with the client as you're working together. And some of this, you want it in your contract, but you also want to be having these discussions with the client. Making sure that they're really solid on their decisions, and making sure they know, if we order this, we are locked in. There are no takebacks. This is non-refundable, non-returnable. If you don't want it, I'm sorry. That can also be a discussion point in addition to being really clear in your contract. All right, so the next thing that I see come up is that oftentimes clients will hire a decorator because they have an event coming up. Maybe they want to freshen up for, nobody's really having parties right now if you're listening to this in August of 2020, which is when I'm recording, but hopefully someday we will again. I've had friends who refreshed their home for a graduation party or a wedding, or, another big event that they had coming up. So if your client is bringing you in and they have a specific event or a specific deadline in mind, maybe they want it before the Christmas holidays or whatever. You want to ask that question, make sure that there's no secret event that they're hoping to hit, but they haven't mentioned it to you. If there are any deadlines or special events coming up, that you make sure you know what the delivery schedule needs to be for you to meet that, and that that's feasible and logistically possible. Oftentimes if you're ordering custom pieces, they may take months to come in, or weeks at least. So just being open and honest and putting that in your contract so that everyone, again, if you have to refer back to it later, you want it to be there so that you can see it. Okay, so let's talk about some of the different services that I see interior designers and decorators offering, and how this might break down in phases in your contract. So often the first step is a design concept. It may be a drawing, it may be a Pinterest board, it may be, just sitting down with a bunch of samples and kind of mapping out what we like and what we don't like. It can look like a lot of different things. That's one of the wonderful things about interior designers and decorators. There's so much flexibility in how you can work with clients and the types of things you can do. But that, initial design or concept is generally a first step. The next one might be specifications of items. So actually picking out, okay, here are 4 sofas, pick one, or here are 3 lamps that I suggest, or here are some accessories or some art, all the different items, tile, wallpaper, fabric that goes into a beautiful design. So, breaking out, making suggestions of that may be another phase. Then actually ordering or purchasing. So narrowing down those options and actually executing, starting to get the items in. Once you start going, once, we've made our selections, we're ready to do installation, or maybe we've got, some work that needs to be done around the house. Are you, the decorator or designer, going to project manage? This is something I definitely realized as a homeowner when we renovated our home about 6-7 years ago. My husband is actually a construction project manager by training, so I should have known this. We worked with a general contractor and we had our decorator. And so, kind of defining those roles can be really, really critical. Who's doing what? Our designer was wonderful, Kim, who I mentioned. She helped us, I'll give our bathroom as an example. She helped us pick out all the finishes. So we had several different kinds of tile. She helped us pick out the countertops, all the hardware. Think about all the different parts and pieces that go into a bathroom. The tub, the shower, the sinks, the lighting, the paint color. She helped us with all of that, the cabinets. But then once it came time to actually, for the contractor to put all of those pieces together, we had not hired Kim for that project management piece. And I really was kind of kicking myself later on because the tile guy did not really understand what the vision was and how everything was supposed to fit together. And the contractor had never done a project quite like what we were wanting to do. And so there was definitely, I had to basically project manage that piece because I knew what the decorator wanted and I was trying to explain it to the contractor and the tile guy. It was kind of a mess. And so I think communicating with your client about what you are going to do as far as project management or not do so that and again, Kim did exactly what I had asked her to do. I really realized it later on when some things were wrong that, I wish I had, brought her in to be a more active manager of that piece because it was kind of complicated. But so again, having these discussions with your clients early on so that they know how much you're going to do or not do. And if you are project managing the installation or other subcontractors or vendors, just making sure that that's in the contract, that everyone understands how you're being paid for that, if it's built in elsewhere. So everybody knows their roles. We all know what we're doing. And then the last phase is usually, finishing touches. Think about accessories, little doodads and bebobs, bringing in lamps or art or, things they go on a tabletop, the things that really pull a room together. So I outlined all these phases for a reason because I am a big fan in your contract of breaking these out in phases really clearly and also tying payments to them if you can. It's not required, but I like it because let's say, sometimes you're going to have a disagreement with a client or a falling out, or maybe somebody loses a job and they've got to put the project on hold. All kinds of things can happen where maybe the project is put on pause or you guys decide, either side decides that it's not a good fit and you decide to part ways. We'll talk about termination in a minute, but it's nice if you do have phases of a project like this. I mean, some of these projects may be a year or more. And so tagging payments to those different phases. So if you do, stop the project or part ways, that you can figure out, okay, you've paid me X to date, I've done Y, this is what you still owe me, or, you've actually overpaid me, I haven't done that next phase, so maybe there's a refund involved. You can figure that out much easier if you've got it very, very well spelled out in your contract. So I want you to think about that. All right, so let's talk about some of the particular risks that you have as an interior decorator. You are in someone's home. So there's a possibility you could damage something. There's a possibility a vendor or a subcontractor could damage something. As I mentioned before, there's a possibility that, a table could collapse that you ordered and someone gets injured, or a drapery could fall, or, a piece of art that you hung might fall. You're dealing with physical objects, unless you are a totally online service. You're dealing with physical objects and you're in people's homes. I mean, you could slip and fall and you could get hurt in someone's home. So we're looking at different kinds of risks than our graphic designer who is just sitting behind a computer and, not really at risk for anything. So in your contract, and then we're going to talk about some other legal protections in a minute, but in your contract, you want to really clearly spell out who is responsible for those risks, who bears those risks. Are you saying as an interior decorator, I'm not on the hook for any of this? Do you take maybe some of it? Or do you basically say, nope, once something's in your home, it's on you? Again, there's lots of options there within, you may want to check your state law for this, but you may be able to add some protections to yourself in the contract so that if something does go wrong, you can never get away from if you installed something knowing it was dangerous or you intended for someone to get hurt. We can never get away from that. But let's say, accidents happen, things break, things don't always perform as expected. There may be some ways you can address that in your contract. The last thing I want to talk about in your contract is who owns the rights in your designs. And we'll talk more about how you can protect those in just a minute. But you want to be really clear in your contract on how that's going to work, especially if you guys decide to part ways before the project is complete. So maybe you've done some sketching, maybe you've given some renderings, or, we mentioned it, maybe a design concept. Can the client go ahead and finish that if you guys aren't working together? Can they take it to another designer? Can they post it on Facebook? Can they share your work? Who owns the rights? And, that is a creative work. It's protected by copyright under United States laws. So just putting some guardrails around that and how you want that to work is really important. Again, you have a lot of flexibility, but you want to talk about it with the client so that everybody's on the same page. You may also, a lot of decorators now will hire a professional photographer to come in and take images of the finished product, maybe to use in their portfolio, maybe to use on their website or other marketing. Will you give the client the rights to use those photos? Maybe they want to show off your design and maybe that's fine with you. Or maybe you really want, tight controls around that. You also need to think about if you've hired a photographer, if it's not you, the photographer may actually own the rights to those images. So you want to make sure all of that is above board and we're really clear on how that's all going to work. All right, I know that was a lot. These interior design contracts are some of the more complicated ones that we work on because there are so many moving parts. So I hope that wasn't overwhelming. I hope it got your wheels turning and starting to think about, I hate to be a negative Nelly, but we see how these things go wrong. And so I feel like we have the opportunity to help you, see what's coming, see what might go wrong so that you can put the right protections in place on the front end when it is much cheaper, easier. It will save you a ton of time and trouble. All right, so let's talk. I mentioned that interior designers and decorators may have more risk than some other creative businesses. So there's two ways that we address that in addition to the contract things that we already talked about. The first is by forming an LLC or a corporation. So this is what we call a corporate entity. Now, if you've listened to some of the other episodes I've done about other kinds of service providers, I often say that this can wait a little bit because they are lower risk. But if you are an interior designer or decorator, I strongly encourage you to go ahead and take this leap to form an entity, whether that's an LLC or a corporation. Because you do have so much more risk that something could go wrong and that you could get sued. When we think about an LLC or a corporation, what we're really trying to do is protect your personal assets, so your personal car, your personal bank account, your home, anything that you own personally. We want to keep that away from and protected from anything that goes wrong in the business. So let's say, I gave the example of a heavy drapery. I'm looking at their draperies. A heavy drapery rod falling and maybe injuring a person or damaging a house, and you get sued because maybe you oversaw that installation. Maybe you did the installation. If that happens and you have an LLC or a corporation, the only thing that they can get at as far as paying out damages, medical bills, repairs on the house, all of that, the only assets they can get at are whatever your business owns. So that's going to be your business bank account. If you have any equipment or a building or real estate, they can get at anything that's owned by the business, but they can't attack your personal bank account. They can't get to your personal car, your personal home. That's all isolated. It's kept separate. So I like to say it's like building a fence around your business. Anything that goes wrong within the business stays in the business. They can't get at everything outside the fence. So I would encourage you to sit down with a lawyer, sit down with your financial advisor, figure out which corporate entity is right for you, and do that earlier to protect any of your personal assets from things that could go wrong in your business. The flip side of that, the second way that we protect against things that go wrong in the business is with insurance. Now, I'm not an insurance expert, but I do talk about this with a lot of my clients, especially those who are doing riskier things. You want to make sure that you have a good, general liability policy. I highly recommend, and we'll include a link in the show notes to this, that if you don't already work with an agent, a commercial, business insurance agent, that you reach out to your local SBA office, Small Business Administration. They often can connect you with local resources. They're wonderful. We have an office here in Chattanooga, and we are not a big city. So if you are in or near any kind of city of any size, you should be able to find an SBA office, and they can help connect you with someone who can be helpful. It's really great to sit down with an insurance agent and not just, I know there's all kinds of online options now, but I really like sitting down with an agent and actually explaining to them how your business works, all the different things you're doing, so that you can make sure you're getting the right coverage. So what insurance does that's a little bit different than your corporate entity, insurance will actually pay those damages. So let's say, again, the drapery falls, damages the house, damages a person, injuries, medical bills. If you just have the LLC or the corporation set up, your company will still have to pay out those damages to the extent it can. So, it may mean that your business goes bankrupt if it can't pay all of those expenses. What insurance does is it actually pays those expenses for you. So your business doesn't have to go bankrupt. It also, and this is one of the biggest benefits of insurance, is typically if a claim is covered by your insurance, not everything will be, but if a claim is covered by your insurance, they will typically hire a lawyer for you and pay those legal fees. And that can be the most expensive part of being sued or having, being threatened to be sued is actually your legal fees. So again, if all you've got is your LLC or your corporation, you, the business, are paying for those attorneys, paying all of those out-of-pocket expenses. And again, that can get really expensive really quickly, and it may bankrupt your business. So those are the two sides of liability protection, are having an LLC or a corporation and having insurance. I recommend both of those if you're an interior designer or decorator. All right, so let's move on to something that's a little bit more fun, which is protecting the intellectual property in your designs. So again, these are creative designs that could be protected by copyright, depending on how they, how you've put them together. If it's just a Pinterest board, that's probably not going to be protected by copyright. But if you've done some sketching, if you have, put together a design, a concept, you've drawn out the room and how you think it should look, that's protected by copyright. And so if you have a design that you're really worried about being copied, you might consider registering that with the United States Copyright Office. You do that by filling out an online form. It's fairly easy, and paying a fee. It's not very expensive. It's about $65 right now per work. And you get your protection. Now, in the United States, we have automatic protection for copyrighted designs. So what that means is as soon as it's out of your head, it can't just be, I have this idea for a design. It has to be on a piece of paper or in a computer file. It has to be in some sort of tangible medium, but that could also be digital. And what the copyright registration is going to do is it gives you another level of protection, because you cannot actually file a lawsuit in the United States if someone copies your design until you've actually registered it with the Copyright Office. You have to have that copyright certificate in your hand before you can file a lawsuit. And what that means as a practical matter is that if you think you might need to send a cease and desist letter, if you think you might need to contact someone who's copied your designs and ask them to stop, ask them to take it down. This is also true with photos. So if you have, beautiful photos that you're worried are going to be copied, those are creative works as well. I recommend that you register them with the Copyright Office so that you can actually enforce those rights if and when you need to. So what happens if you do find out about a copycat? I actually handled an issue about this for an interior design client not long ago. We found that another company had actually posted their image on a social media website, and it wasn't exactly claiming that they had done the design, but it was like highly insinuated. And my client was pretty upset about it, as you might imagine. So what do you do in that event? We've got a couple of options. You can reach out to them directly if you have a relationship with them, if you know them. That's often a good first step because honestly, some people just don't know better. They should, and we're going to talk about that in just a second about you using other people's works the right way. If you're running a business, you should really be careful about this, but some people just don't know. And so sometimes just reaching out informally and saying, hey, I saw you did this. I'd appreciate it if you take it down. Sometimes that's all you need to do. If that doesn't work, sometimes you need to escalate it. The nice thing is if they are sharing on social media or a platform like YouTube, you can actually file a takedown request with the platform. So you can bypass, if you just don't want to talk to the other person, you can bypass them altogether and report it as copyright infringement. Now, some of them will require that you have a copyright registration, but not all of them. And you can ask them to take it down. Now, the bummer to this, the downside to this is the other side still gets a chance to respond. And sometimes they'll say, no, I think my use of that photo was fine, or I think this was fair use. And so the platform in that instance generally is not going to want to get between you and make a decision of who's right. So they will usually put it back up if that happens. But many people will not respond. And so it's still a good kind of tool in your toolkit if you do find that you're being copied is to file reports. And I will tell you, if the other person gets a bunch of reports filed against them, they could have their account shut down. So it is important for you to, kind of enforce your rights. If you see somebody doing this a lot, to go ahead and file the takedown notice because it will, hopefully eventually stop them. If none of that works, we could talk about if it's important enough to you, getting a lawyer involved to send a formal cease and desist letter, or at the end of the road, your last ditch option is to file a lawsuit. But we typically like to avoid that if we can. It's very expensive and it takes forever. It's long. It is not quick. It's not going to resolve anything fast. So we like to try all the other tools in our toolkit first, but that lawsuit is going to be your last resort. All right, the last thing I want to talk about, the last legal issue that I want to focus on for interior designers and decorators is what I hinted at, which is using other people's work the right way. So this can get really tricky because you are maybe incorporating a lot of other people's work into your design. Maybe there's a beautiful lamp that could be a copyrighted piece. Maybe you have artwork that could, maybe your owner buys the physical piece, but that doesn't mean they own the rights to actually, post it online. There's separate copyrights in the physical piece. And, if you buy the physical piece, you only own the physical piece. You don't own the underlying copyrights in a painting. So there may be rules around, what you can post, what you can use. And then certainly, like the example I just gave, if you are posting other people's work on your website, your social media, you need to either get permission. That's the ideal, number one. Reach out and say, hey, I loved this design. I'd love to feature it on my website and maybe give some commentary about it. Or I'm doing a roundup of rooms with green couches. Do you mind if I use this image? That's always the best idea, is to get permission. If you are not getting permission, you're always at risk that somebody could be unhappy about the way you use their work, and they could, do all the things that I just talked about a minute ago, send you a mean letter, ask you to take it down, file a takedown notice against you, file a lawsuit against you. We don't want to be in that situation. So asking for permission is always the best bet. It can be as simple as a quick DM, a quick email. It doesn't have to be fancy or burdensome. But definitely being careful if you're using other people's work, and definitely giving credit. Giving credit will not get around the fact that you maybe are using people's work without their permission. It could still be an infringement, But if you are giving people credit, if you're linking to where you found something, especially if you're featuring art or something that people could actually purchase, maybe you do a roundup of modern art that looks great in offices. If you are including a link to where people can purchase the art, the person whose art you're posting is going to be much less likely to be upset about that than if you just, you're copying the image and you're not even, being helpful to them as a business at all. So definitely being careful around your use of third-party works. Mostly with decorators, it's images and art and that kind of thing. All right, as I mentioned, we do have a template. So if all of this has gotten your wheels turning as an interior designer or decorator, we do have a fantastic customizable template that will be in our contract shop when this podcast episode goes live. So go check that out. And we have a free, no cost, totally free resource that goes with this episode. And that is our guide of how to write your own contracts. Maybe you're not quite ready to purchase a template. Maybe you want to try it on your own. We do have a guide of how to write your own contract with the 5 key terms that you need to include and some sample language. You can find that on the show notes page, which we'll link. That's for episode 153. So it's at awbfirm.com/podcast 153. Go grab that. It's very helpful. As you know, we do a Facebook Live most Thursdays. We've been a little off track with summer and COVID and everything's a little off track, but school is about to start back. So we should be pretty steady on the Facebook Live schedule every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. Definitely join us for that. And let me know if you had any questions about this. I love to answer questions and be helpful. I do that mostly in our Facebook group. So that's the Legal Roadmap Podcast Facebook group. But I also love to answer DMs. I'm very active on Instagram and Facebook, so you can find us either place. All right. I hope this was helpful. Be sure again to tune in next week to our interview with Kendall, and we'll learn about her online interior design services. All right. You guys have a good one.